We have some pretty big news. The NHL Board of Governors has approved the return to play for 2021, and we've learned a lot more details. We'll get into all this latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have some pretty huge breaking news here. The NHL Board of Governors has met, had their conference call, and has voted to accept the proposal for the NHL's return to play for 2021. We already had heard that the players were willing and able to proceed. We also learned as well that we should have a tentative schedule for NHL games starting January the 13th, out sometime around the middle of the week. So stay tuned for that. Now let's jump into all the fine details that we've learned since our last video on this topic about the 2021 season and how it's all going to work. First up, let's get into the taxi squads and how that's going to work. How it's going to work is there going to be a minimum of 4, maximum of 6 players. So obviously while they're in the taxi squad, if they're on a one-way NHL contract, they'll be paid their NHL salary just like they normally would. So the same rules would apply. If they're on a two-way deal, they'll get paid their American Hockey League salary, and of course they'll get per diems when they get called up to go into NHL games. So obviously those players will be permitted to travel with the team, they can practice with the team, they can take part in all NHL team activities, but they will not be permitted to participate in anything that's American Hockey League related. So they will be completely staying with the NHL team the whole time they're considered part of the taxi squad. The taxi squads will be going away after the end of the season because they're hoping next year will be what we used to call normal. So obviously this is only going to be a temporarily approved measure for the coming season. Now, how it's also going to work for goaltenders, and the NHL teams are going to be required to carry 3 goaltenders. So depending on how they want to structure their roster, they're going to have more than likely 1 goaltender on the taxi squad. They could put 3 goalies on the NHL roster, but I don't really see many scenarios where that would be beneficial, but they will have to have 3 NHL goaltenders on hand. So most teams will carry their regular starter and backup on the NHL roster and have somebody who would normally play probably in the American Hockey League as part of their taxi squad. So obviously that's going to be quite big for goaltenders. There's going to be a lot of goalies going to be hanging around NHL teams and getting probably a little bit more action and at least exposure to the NHL than it would have otherwise. Also going to impact what talent level is going to be available for American Hockey League teams too. So we will see, but a 3rd goaltender makes a lot of sense given how complex some call-ups could be. It only makes more sense to have more resources on hand so they don't have to make things any more complicated than they need to be. Another key feature of the taxi squad is if they're considered unfit to play, regardless if it's due to injury, anything to do with COVID, or anything else, when they're on a taxi squad, they can be replaced. So they're deemed unfit to play, they'd basically be considered on injured reserve. So the NHL team could opt to bring up another player to make them a part of that squad if they so desire. But I mean, I would think in the case if it's only 1 player, we probably won't see NHL teams do that very often. Of course, they could do that a lot with NHL rookies and young players on entry-level deals, because we did learn one more thing too when it comes to ELCs, as far as the number of games that they can play in order to burn a year of their contract, which previously was 10. Obviously, with the condensed shortened season of 56 games, that's been lowered down to 7. So obviously, if you look at a lot of the guys, for example, even that were 2020 first rounders that are debatable if they would make their NHL teams or not, they can keep them around. They can get part of the NHL culture, practice with the team, get to know the team more, and they can kind of decide when they put them in and out of the lineup and kind of play around with that and before they end up burning a year of their deal. So obviously that could be quite beneficial. Obviously depends on what other options are available for the team as well. But certainly the entry-level slide number makes sense for that to be reduced given the shortened year. Now, of course, we have touched on divisions in prior videos, but we do have more confirmation on what they're going to look like. Of course, the All-Canadian division, as of right now, is a go. We do have word that it is the province of British Columbia and BC that is giving the NHL some more challenges and so far have not approved their plan to allow the Canucks to play their games at home. The issue is really not so much with Vancouver going into their building and having team activities. It's more about other teams traveling in to play them. That seems to be the biggest area of concern. I still don't really see a scenario where they're going to move all the Canadian teams to the United States. I mean, it is a slim possibility we could get to that, but I can't see it. I think more likely, the more likely scenario we see is that Vancouver Canucks have to relocate to another Canadian city and share a building. Probably the Edmonton Oilers would make the most sense in my opinion. It's one of the closest teams geographically. We know they had put up a good bubble there before, so there's lots of resources handy to kind of accommodate other teams. So to me, that would probably be the more likely scenario, or at least to start the season. And then as time goes on, if the situation with COVID changes back in BC, they could possibly and hopefully revert back later into the regular season, or at least if they're able to be a playoff team, maybe for that. So we'll see. Same thing goes for the San Jose Sharks. I'm not aware of any other teams right now besides Vancouver and San Jose that are going to have issues, but that could still possibly pop up. The Sharks will not be able to play games in their building. Right now it's believed that they're going to be having their training camp in Arizona, and then from there they very well could end up having to play their home games there as well. So we will see if there's any further developments on that, or if any other teams run into this. But again, that's going to be a scenario to keep your eye on. And of course, they will be able to head back home if things change. It's a long season. I know the NHL owners are probably not banking on getting a whole lot of revenue, because there likely won't be any fans or very little fans in most markets to start the year anyway. But when they get to later in the season into the playoffs, especially those playoff teams, they'd love to be able to make up for the lost revenue and sell some tickets. So we'll see if those teams can get back home before everything is all said and done. Now, as far as how the division structure is going to go, like I said, the Canadian division is still a thing. I expect it to remain that way. So all 7 Canadian teams, with the Canucks, Oilers, Flames, Jets, Sens, Leafs, and Habs all taking part in that division. So, of course, we'll take a look here quickly at the other 3 U.S.-based divisions. As far as we know, it looks like they're just going to be titled some simple names, like the North Division will be the Canadian one. We'll have the East, Central, and West. Hoping here that maybe the NHL will get creative and use some different names just to kind of change things up. Maybe we'll have like a bit of a retro type of thing where we have like the Norris Division, Smythe Division, that type of thing. But right now we don't have any confirmation on that. But the teams in the East, let's have a quick look here to recap. Like I mentioned before, will be teams from the former Atlantic Division and the Sabres and the Bruins. All the other teams are from the former Metro of the Devils, Islanders, Rangers, Flyers, Penguins, and the Washington Capitals. The Central Division is going to be a little bit of a mishmash of teams from different divisions, really. I mean, some of these teams used to be in divisions together before, but haven't been recently. Like the Red Wings and the Blackhawks used to be former North Division rivals for a long time, but under the current format have been in separate conferences. So you get the Red Wings and the Hawks, you get the 2 teams down in Florida, the Lightning and the Panthers. You've also got the Carolina Hurricanes in there as well, so kind of like the 3 teams from the Southeast. You get the Predators, and the Blue Jackets are also part of the Central Division here as well. And of course, we can't forget the Dallas Stars, which many thought might be part of the Western Division, but it's the Stars that go into Central here. And we have a couple of normal Central teams that move to the West. So the Blues and the Wild will be part of the Western Division, along with the 3 teams in California. Of course, the Kings, Ducks, and Sharks. Sharks, like I said, playing out of Arizona, but will still be in the Western Division regardless. Of course, the Coyotes and the Vegas Golden Knights in there as well, along with the Colorado Avalanche. So certainly some interesting divisions there. Now, there is not going to be any conferences this year. So how this is going to work for the 2021 NHL playoffs is the top 4 teams in each division will be making the playoffs, and they'll do a 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3 format like we used to see back in the older days here. Of course, like I said, back when we had the Norris Division and Smythe Division and all those, that's what they used to do way back, and it was kind of a fun concept. So we'll see how this goes. So what they'll do is they'll 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3. Of course, the 2 winners will play to form a division winner. Once we have all 4 division winners, then they'll go to what they call the NHL semifinals for the Stanley Cup. And then the 4 remaining teams will be seeded accordingly, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then they're going to do 1 versus 4 and 2 versus 3. And of course, the 2 winners will then play in the Stanley Cup final for Lord Stanley's Cup. So a little bit of a different format, but it should be fun and interesting, and we could very well see some very different playoff battles and some playoff, what we normally have like a conference final and a Stanley Cup final. It could be some very different, unique matchups that we would not have seen under different formats. And as I mentioned before, this will guarantee a Canadian team to get to the Final Four, which is not something we've seen very much of here in a long time. So should be good for them to get a deeper possibility here for a playoff run. So we'll see how that goes. Now, as far as some key dates, there's obviously a lot of people wondering when everything gets underway. So, of course, December the 31st is when training camp opens here for the non-playoff teams. So the 7 teams that did not go to the return to play, their training camps open December the 31st. Now, the rest of the NHL will open up on January the 3rd. That's when all the other teams will open their camps. No exhibition games, no preseason games. So we'll go straight into meaningful games starting right now on January the 13th. That has not changed as of right now, and they're hoping to target that still, as long as there's no issues with getting, the buildings open and everything like that. That's not going to be changing, but I guess we'll have to wait for 100% confirmation if we get a little bit closer here. February the 1st will be when teams can talk to their players that have a no-move clause about possibly waiving for the upcoming expansion draft. Of course, we saw a couple of years back when Vegas was coming into the league, teams had a certain amount of time to talk to anybody with a no-move about considering waiving it, so that's when they're first allowed to have discussions. The player does not have to necessarily give them a response immediately, but that's when discussions are allowed to start taking place, and teams can start preparing a little bit more for that process. This year's NHL trade deadline will be April the 12th, so obviously that'll get us to about the point when about 80% or so of the games are completed, so that's going to be an interesting time. And then right now they're targeting May the 8th as the last game of the regular NHL season. Now, of course, if there are any games or anything that needs to be postponed, or if anything comes up along the way that they have to adjust the schedule, then obviously those dates, including May the 8th especially, could be pushed back here a little bit. But if all that goes to plan, then May 11th will be the beginning of the 2021 Stanley Cup playoffs, with July the 15th being the last possible date that the Stanley Cup could be awarded. So the Cup will be out on the 15th of July or sooner, depending on how each playoff series goes. And of course, just like always, within a 24-hour period after that Stanley Cup is awarded, so at the July 16th at the latest will be when the buyout window opens up for NHL teams to be able to consider buying out current NHL contracts. Now, not long after that, we'll go into the Seattle expansion draft, tentatively set for July the 21st. And then, of course, once that's completed, a few days later, starting July 23rd and finishing on the 24th, we'll have the 2021 NHL entry draft. Now, there was some talk about that process being bumped further out and maybe having the NHL draft as late as even early December, but right now that does not seem to be the case. So the 23rd and 24th of July would be when we have the current NHL draft. And not long after that, on July the 28th, would be when free agency opens. So July 28th essentially will be free agent frenzy. Of course, teams will have really the month of August and a little bit of September to kind of start getting their rosters intact. And then training camps will likely open for 21-22 near the second half of September, with an early October start date like they would normally have. And hopefully everything on the hockey calendar can somewhat go back to normal. But those are the full details. Based on everything we've learned, I'm not sure there's going to be a whole lot of details that we haven't been able to get that's been leaked out here through the insiders. So let me know your thoughts. Hopefully everybody's getting excited. We're getting really, really close to having NHL hockey again. Of course, we have the World Juniors starting on December 25th here, not far away, for Christmas Day. So we'll be covering that tournament as well. So stay tuned for World Junior coverage. And of course, we won't be too long after that, right before we head into the new year of 2021. NHL training camps will be starting to open, and we can have something to look forward to. So hope you're excited. I know I sure am. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I'll catch you next time.